All right, everybody, welcome into the final committee meeting. Hopefully, we only have 3 people. It's kind of a bootleg sort of a committee this year because of weird power issues, but we're gonna make do. So this is gonna be the bulk, really, of the decisions, and then tomorrow, if anyone else on who's on the committee has like game-breaking issue with ranking or something, then we'll go back over it. Um, but for now, this is what we're gonna say is the final one. Um, so yeah, let's get started. I think everybody knows Clemson's gonna be number 1, right?
Yeah, that's what I have. I mean, it just feels
Um,
obvious.
yes, and before we get too much farther, things to remember for the final rankings is we're making the actual playoffs. So, um, in terms of the top 4, it has to be the auto bids remaining. We only have 4 this year, so the top 4 are going to be some mixture of Clemson, Nebraska, Buffalo, and Georgia, and then um, when we're ranking then we're going to decide who's going to be the last 4 in, and then we'll decide the matchups to make sure there's no rematches in the first round, all that sort of stuff. So, um, and then we'll move on from there once we get 8. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. So first, Clemson. So that means um, that they will be playing in the Peach Bowl because the bowls are decided um, by location. So obviously, Clemson's closest quarterfinal game. The quarterfinals are the Peach, the Cotton, the Sugar, and the Rose, or not the Rose, sorry, the Fiesta. So the Peach is in Georgia. So Clemson's going to be playing there, and then that means the Orange Bowl will be on the left side of the bracket. Um, okay. So in terms of number 2, I think you could really put any of these 3 teams there, honestly. My pick would be Georgia.
And I have at number 2, I have Buffalo.
I also have Buffalo at number 2.
Okay, so we nobody has Nebraska, so we're not going to consider them at this spot. Um, the- Going through these 2 teams, obviously you have the MAC winner Buffalo 13-0. Um, Best win is San Diego State, who is the Mountain West champion, and then they only have wins over Bowling Green, Ball State, obviously, and that we watched in the MAC championship. They have Tennessee and they have Ohio as well. Now, the reason I'm suggesting Georgia, obviously they just beat Ole Miss, one of the best teams in the country, um, but they haven't lost in 8 weeks. They they've beaten some quality teams, and their only losses in overtime, plus a 2-point loss against a Notre Dame team. And they played the common opponent Tennessee better. So that's why I have them. I feel like Georgia had enough on the resume to get over um, a weak Buffalo schedule.
When Tennessee and Georgia played, was Tennessee at full strength at that point? Because I know, obviously, with Buffalo being early in the season, they still had, everybody, and I think there were some, both a combination of what injuries as well as, Nick was doing some interesting things with his quarterback situation that I'm trying to remember that specific week if there
I
was
think that
a
happened
yeah.
during Auburn.
Yeah, so good shout. Yeah, so the quarterback went down against Auburn, and then he started the wide receiver against South Carolina.
That
So
was it.
the
Okay.
Georgia loss was like their last.
The last full
Um,
strength.
right.
Okay. Fair.
I'm trying to look see if we have any other common opponents besides. Um, I also see the Texas A&M victory, which Clemson actually is their only loss. The Notre Dame, obviously, that could potentially be a playoff team. We'll see later, but it's still a pretty good loss. I don't think I see any other common opponents. Let's go check.
I don't think so.
Yeah, no, there's no other ones. Um, really, for me, what it comes down to is they're comparable. Is that I would put Georgia ahead. Uh, while it may not be fair, no G5 team has won a playoff game ever, and the last two times we've put a G5 at number two, they've gotten blown out. So that kind of also impacts my decision a little bit. Um, but if I'm outvoted, I'm outvoted.
I mean,
I could see either. I think that
like
it's one that I think that I would have them as the 2-3, um, either
Yeah,
way.
I can agree at the 2-3. Yeah.
that's what I have. Georgia at 3 and Nebraska at 4. I could see them
Yeah,
switching
and
back
and for
Georgia.
me, it's I have the same thing: Buffalo 2, Georgia 3, Nebraska 4. But you do make sense there. If we ended up going Clemson, Georgia, Buffalo, Nebraska, I wouldn't be mad at that either. I think that would be a good lineup too. Um, it's one of those that even it seems it's important because it's the 2 seed and the 3 seed, but at the same time, I don't have a strong push one way or the other. I think that they're pretty locked dead even to me. That if we went one way or the other, it wouldn't be hard to justify it either way.
So
Uh,
why don't we table that decision until we figure out what happens with Ole Miss? Because one, we're not gonna we don't do first round rematches unless we're absolutely have to, and the 2-3, the whoever's two is going to be in the sugar because that's the closer one for both teams, and then the three is going to be in the cotton because that's in Texas. So that means Nebraska will be going to the Fiesta Bowl at 4, and then depending on what we do or where they're seated for Ole Miss, then we can come back and figure out 2 or 3. Is that good with everybody?
Yeah, that sounds
yeah,
good to me.
Okay. So
we got Nebraska at 4.
yeah, so we have Nebraska currently at 4. So now, um, it becomes, we, like I said, we had a crazy conference championship week. Now there are plenty of teams in the mix now for the top at large. You've got Ole Miss, you've got Ohio State, you have Notre Dame, who was 5 last week, you have ECU, you have Baylor, you have Arkansas, you have Arizona State, Boston College, Minnesota, and that's kind of where I stopped. Um, so I can't speak on ECU, but where do you guys want to go from here?
I think the 4 teams I have in the left 4 are ECU, uh, Ohio State, Ole Miss, and Notre Dame. Not specifically in that order. I don't remember what order I put them
Yeah,
in, but
and
that's it.
the four that I have as well are ECU, Ole Miss, Ohio State, and Notre Dame are the four again. That's not in the order I currently have them, but those are the other four I have as the at-larges. So I have Baylor just outside at number 9, just outside Arkansas at 10, Arizona State at 11. So I have those three as just outside. But yeah, Ohio State, Ole Miss, ECU, Notre Dame are the four that I have. Again, agree as like Yui said as well, not specifically in that order, but those are the four I have.
I think with those
So,
orders, at least they can be switched around.
only one. So, I mean, I'm probably in the same boat. Um, Now for like, I think that there's a lot, like a case to be made about Ohio State kind of being a chump, losing back to back to Michigan and Iowa, is because we go by full resume, not just like, oh, Ohio State was ranked number 2 all year. They're going to
Mm-hmm.
be in even if they lost, right?
Yeah.
Um, so so I think we kind of need to look at each of the resumes and then um because I can see like pretty much the only contenders for me is, I can't speak on ECU, but I would have them in. um, I would have George, or sorry, not Georgia. Um, I would have probably Ole Miss, Ohio State, Notre Dame, um, and then Baylor. and Arizona State maybe. I would have Arkansas out, even though they do have the head-to-head over Baylor. It was because there's a backup quarterback. But
Yeah, I think
okay.
at least for me, ECU is definitely a lock.
Yeah, I would agree that ECU is a lock. They haven't done anything to drop out of the top 8, and there wasn't enough push from anybody outside of the top 8 to take their spot. So I guess the two that I would have for sure locks, because for that reason, would be Notre Dame and ECU. I think we could debate Ole Miss, we could debate Ohio State with both of them. With, like you said, Ohio State taking those two losses back to back, Ole Miss losing there in the championship game. Um, those two I could see with those last losses if they got pushed out. But Notre Dame and ECU, ECU won, and Notre Dame has, stayed at that top spot. They haven't done anything to lose that spot. So those would be the two that I would have as for sure locks. The others we could debate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Notre Dame has probably right now the best win out of the remaining teams.
Yeah, because of the
Um, so you got Cal, you lost with 1 point. Oregon didn't win this game, so we don't know if we'd rank them. Utah as well, so 2 in the Pac-12 championship. So okay, so do we want to just pencil in right now the Notre Dame and the and ECU
I personally would,
yes.
as
yes.
part of the top? Okay. So if we have them currently as in, then the kind of the 3 really remaining or 4 remaining would then be Ole Miss, Ohio State, Arizona State, and Baylor would be the only real contenders left. So let's just at least do our due diligence and look at the resumes. So we'll go over Baylor first. They have 3 losses. So the 3 losses, just gonna pencil, lost to DU, who's 6-6 team, by
Mhm.
3. CU by 3. Okay. And then they lost to Arkansas by 7. Now, those 2 losses were backup QBs, so that is like kind of an asterisk, I guess. The other loss, obviously, is to Nebraska, and that was by 9. Then you have wins, is the really good wins. I mean, I just say any win over 6 wins is technically quality, but obviously the big time wins are more. So Kent, Duke, so that's 3. ISU, the Kansas win though is the best one on the resume. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 quality wins. Um, but only really 2 decent ones. Obviously Kansas slash Cincy. So not really that great. Um, all right. Moving on, we have the Big Ten now. We have Ohio State here. Um, their losses first is 6-6 Michigan, and then obviously the 8-5 Iowa in the conference championship. And then it's something to be said that Baylor and Ohio State both make their championships. So that's something we got to talk about. Um, and then the big wins, let's see, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They also have 6 quality wins. But their biggest win is Oregon, SDSU, and Michigan State. So MSU and SDSU. Okay. Now moving on. I know we have them in, just reminding myself, Georgia, and then they lost Stanford Navy, both 7-5. Okay. And then Arizona State, their losses
One
is
point.
is to Oregon. So the common opponent with Ohio State. And then the other loss is Utah. And then they have 1, 2, 3, only 3 quality wins. And the best wins are Cal and Stanford. But Stanford's not really even a quality win. So Cal's really the only win there. And then SEC, Ole Miss. So Ole Miss, the losses were to Northwestern by 2, and then you have the Georgia loss. And then quality wins would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they also have 6 quality wins, but they have probably the best wins, which are Oklahoma, TAMU, and Arkansas. Okay. So just judging off what I'm seeing here is that probably the team that's the best of the rest here is probably Ole Miss. And then I would probably eliminate ASU.
Yep.
So then for me the final spot would come down between Ohio State
Baylor.
and Baylor.
Yeah.
Very similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When
So
you're looking at those schedules, I was surprised at how close they actually are.
yeah. Yeah, normally that's why I do the due diligence, just because like a lot of times, like one time we were like, oh yeah, no, Notre Dame for sure is 5, 5, 5, and then we actually started looking at it and it wound up 8 or 9th. So all right, Baylor. Okay, so let's look into those 2 more. So I currently have Ole Miss penciled in with ECU and Notre Dame. We haven't seeded them yet. Well, let's figure out our 8 first. So you have Baylor here, 10-3, made their conference championship. Cincinnati is a quality G5 win, but it's a G5. Kent State, not really gonna say much about that. Duke, okay, it was only a 3-point win though. Louisville, not much. The 2 losses are for backup quarterbacks, so it's kind of dependent how much we take that into account. And Arkansas is also a top 10 team. Then beat TCU, beat Texas Tech, beat Iowa State. Iowa State probably is a better team when they have their quarterback, but this was with the backup quarterback. They got that big time win against Kansas on game day, and then took care of business against the rest, and then lost to Nebraska, who is a top 4 team. So I think this is so hard because like this Michigan loss is comparable with that Colorado loss almost identically. They're both 6-6. It's both 24-21. So those are like equal. They cancel out each other. But then you look at here, Oregon just losing is a good win. I'd probably compare the Oregon win to the Kansas win.
That's fair.
San Diego State is probably comparable to the Cincinnati win, even though they are a conference champ. So you do have to give Ohio State the conference champ.
So the big question, I guess, with Ohio State, because I know before this week we weren't really taking injuries into consideration. Ohio State doesn't have any injuries that they're dealing with or dealt with for these 2 games, do they?
No. So their backup running back was injured, and then both linebackers were probable this week. So, and I haven't simmed past the conference championship week yet, so I don't know Heisman, I don't know progression on injuries or anything like that, but it would show any injuries sustained in this week. So let's just go through those 2 teams just to make sure there's no catastrophic injuries. So not Buffalo, where's Baylor? Baylor. So Baylor has none, and then Ohio State. So he was probable, Brandon Lewis, and then they were out their backup running back. And then their running back they do have is a 99 speed, like 95 overall, Malik Nicholson. So I wouldn't consider that much of a problem.
Nothing devastating, but
Yeah.
the one of the reasons I bring it up is for making sure that they're healthy for the future or for the actual bowl games.
Yes.
But the second reason is because, as we were saying, Baylor, both of their losses during the season were with a backup quarterback, whereas Ohio State was basically at full power and still found a way to
Right.
lose to a 6-6 team, and then found a way to lose to a now 8-5 Iowa, who was looking, dead to rights before that championship game.
Yeah. No, that's kind of the conundrum is like, how do you value, like, personally, I don't think, like, Wisconsin's not the same team as they were at the beginning of the year. Illinois, we know, isn't that great. Um, Michigan State has completely fallen off. Um,
Since they got hot
and
over injured.
and important to note that Ohio State did not face Michigan at full strength. They faced them when they did not have McBurnfinger or Calvin Johnson because that was game day.
Right,
Uh,
right.
So
So they were facing an
it's
undermanned Michigan State, and it was still, relatively close.
and then you
yeah,
put
it's
them in
just like
backup so there's one score, so you could say the
yeah,
quarterback would have made those 2 games.
They really didn't want to make their jobs easy this week.
yeah, no. So
It's never easy determining the 8 teams that have a chance of actually winning the trophy.
Yeah, agreed.
You got to justify not including someone.
yeah, it comes down to is the loss to Iowa worse than a backup quarterback loss to Arkansas, even though it's still close, and then losing by 11 to Nebraska. You know what I
Losing
mean?
by 9.
Oh, 9 to Nebraska.
I feel like it definitely is comparable.
Yeah.
Arkansas is a better team than Iowa, so is Nebraska, and both games were at least decently close. And one of them was with a backup, and if the backup was in
In
good safety.
terms of overall, Ohio State's a 91, Baylor's a 90, like the exact same. Oh, 10-3. Hmm.
Before this, I would have said obviously Ohio State, but the more we're looking at
Yeah.
it, the more I'm like, man, I'm surprisingly leaning towards Baylor.
So if we're this close, we can look at this other page that's team stats here. So we can see, we want to see specific like offensive outputs. We can. Um, we have to just go by. So, for instance, Baylor. Um, maybe it would be better to sort by all of NCAA and see where they rank. So, like for instance, total offense, Baylor is here. This is 2, 4, 6, 8. This is 10th, and then Ohio State's right below them. Points per game, it's 34.6 versus 33.1. I don't think the passing splits matter. Defensively, um, in terms of the fewest points given up, Ohio State is there at 207. Baylor's at 249, so that is a little bit more substantial there. Sacks force a little bit more turnovers if you're Ohio State. So really, it's like Ohio State is a better defensively,
Yeah,
but they're worse offensively,
I
and
was
it's
gonna
not
say
really necessarily
you're looking at like the third best defense versus the eighth best defense, and then on offense, 10th best offense versus 13th. It
right.
it almost
Is
it
there?
does the same thing of like leaving us in the exact same spot of it's close to
So
a coin flip as
Ohio's
you can get.
plus 11. So Baylor has a worse turnover differential. They're only at plus 4, but I don't think that necessarily matters.
Another.
Hey, we got a fourth.
All right. So he is an alternate. We don't have 5, so Pinstripe can talk if he wants to. Pin, if you want to talk, we are deciding between Ohio State or uh, Baylor is the last team in. Go back to conference standings. I don't think he's here. I could add up like total strength of schedule in terms of records and see where that lands us.
Yeah.
8.
Pin said he is really disinterested.
Oh,
His roommate's
Pin said he's here. Give me 1 sec. My roommate's sleeping. I'll text my thoughts. So he's gonna send him quick a message.
Oh, yeah.
So 77. So Ohio State played a 77 and 82 schedule. So under 500. Baylor played
And it's currently being for Baylor.
he got 39, 43, 47, 53, 61, 67, 68, 69, then 80, and so that's 80 and 10. 24. So then they play an 80 and 77 schedule, so it's just slightly better.
Okay. And yeah, so Pin says I'm leaning Baylor. Ohio State has no big wins and 2 bad losses. Baylor has a big win in Kansas, and then top 10 teams in Arkansas, Nebraska for the losses. Baylor also has that backup QB argument the committee has loved this year.
Well, that is true. I do love that argument.
That is a great argument.
Um, when I like, yeah, I'm leaning Baylor as well, even though they are 3-loss. I know Ohio, like it's just, I just feel like Ohio State, you had every chance, right? Like Baylor's been playing against their back all year long, and they managed to still be here in the discussion, and they got the big wins when they needed them, right? And then on the other hand, you've got Ohio State, who literally could have just basked in the sun and waddled into the playoff, and then they lose.
Back to
I
back, and
just
yeah.
two bad teams.
And they were a team that we never really took an actual look at before these last 2 weeks because of that specific, because they just kept winning, so there was no reason to
Right.
really examine them deeper. But now that we're actually taking a closer look at them, we're seeing they weren't really a great team for the first 11 weeks, and that's been heavily exposed these last two.
And it is the eighth spot, so it is who's facing
Clemson.
Clemson. So do you want the big time matchup, Ohio State against Clemson, or do you want the rematch of the Natty? Both are great matchups. Um, yeah, I just think Baylor might be the better choice in terms of more deserving, the better
They
resume.
just played better in the 3 feet the whole year. Played tougher competition. The Big 12 has been a bloodbath all year.
Yeah,
Yeah, the Big 12 has been better
yeah, they've been super
throughout.
competitive, and Big Ten has been like, as we got to the end of the season, started to show at least a few glimmers of hope. But in reality, most of the Big Ten was hovering around, 500. I mean, you see, the the top few teams are Minnesota, who, because of that loss to Iowa, weren't able to make it to the conference championship game. But then after them, it's Michigan State at 8-4. Is there anybody who has a better record behind Minnesota and Ohio State? Um, Whereas you have with the Big 12, what multiple double digit win teams, really high quality, uh, multiple like high ranked teams. It just overall their conferences has been better, and the fact that they made it all the way to the conference championship and just barely came up short against Nebraska is more impressive than Ohio State just coasting through uh, the Big Ten.
Yeah. Okay, so I think right now we all have Baylor 8. So, right now we only have Clemson 1, Nebraska 4, Baylor 8. We know it's going to be either Buffalo or Georgia at 2 and 3, and then 5, 6, and 7 are going to be ECU, Notre Dame, Ole Miss. We just don't know what order. So let's go through those. I can't speak on ECU's seeding, but I can talk about the other two. But just a refresher, here's ECU's. Got super lucky in that conference championship. And then next up, refresher here on Notre Dame. They have the win over Georgia, which is the best win out of any of these teams left. Um, and then I just see a mountain of 7 and 5s. Now, three of these, arguably the better of the three, is going to be these. And then these were also the backup quarterback losses. Um, and then finally, you have Ole Miss. So I have my order of what I would recommend,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm gonna let you guys talk first since it involves my team.
Yeah. Yui, do you have a specific order that you want to list, and then I can list mine as well?
I was thinking, if I'm sticking to what I had put out, ECU, Notre Dame, and then Ole Miss. The
Okay.
5, 6 in this.
And for me, I have 5 Notre Dame, 6 ECU, 7 Ole Miss. So I have the Ole Miss same at 7, but 5 and 6 I have flip flop from you.
I have um I have Ole Miss before Notre Dame.
Oh, interesting. So do you have?
I know so like my reasoning, so they both have two losses, right? Ole Miss has the extra win, whatever. I'm more so impressed by the Oklahoma win and the Arkansas win by 20, and they beat Texas A&M by more than I beat them. Um, and then they also stayed competitive with Georgia. Now, it is a very valid argument to have Notre Dame above Ole Miss just for the common opponent, but I would punish Notre Dame slightly for the um
2, 7, and 5 losses.
yeah, 2 7 and 5 losses to some not great teams, a Navy team that ECU absolutely destroyed, and then a yeah, and then a Stanford team.
So do you have? You don't need to tell me where ECU is, but do you have Notre Dame at 7?
Um, See, I never made my actual rankings. It's just
Fair enough.
I see your yeah, it would be Notre Dame 7 because I had Georgia 2, so Georgia couldn't be in the 3 and play Ole Miss at 6. Yeah, so
Yeah, and for me
that
was
was
that
my
for me with mine, I had Buffalo at 2 and Georgia at 3, so I couldn't have Ole Miss at 6. So I had Ole Miss at 7 to make sure there wasn't that rematch. And then I had ECU at 6 to face Georgia, Notre Dame, Nebraska for the 4-5 personally.
I had ECU against Nebraska with the 4-5, and then Notre Dame being, yeah, Notre Dame had to beat Georgia. But that was early in the season, so it's not really like a immediate rematch. So I had Notre Dame at 6, Georgia at 3, and then Ole Miss at 7 from Buffalo at 2.
Yeah, and I don't know how you feel, TC, but it sounds like it's from both me and you. It sounds like we have Buffalo Ole Miss as the matchup. It just depends on the seeding. Um, Obviously, we shouldn't specifically determine seeds based off of who we have as opponents, but that feels like those two against each other works best
yeah,
when you're trying
based
to
on
avoid.
all of us.
Yeah, and we were trying to avoid that rematch of Georgia and Ole Miss. It feels like it needs to be Buffalo, Ole Miss to avoid that. Yeah, based off of
Yeah,
everything we
because
have.
it doesn't sound like any of you guys have Ole Miss pushing all the way up at 5. So if you have them both at 6 and 7, then that matchup has to be against Buffalo.
Hmm.
Um, so then it just comes down to where you value ECU versus Notre Dame.
I think ECU is over Notre Dame.
I can pull them back both up.
And just to make sure Pin is heard, he said, "I'm not a fan of punishing teams for playing games when others don't, which is why I have Ole Miss remaining over Notre Dame." And then he also has ECU over Notre Dame as well. So it sounds like he has Notre Dame, like he personally, it sounds like he has Notre Dame at 7, and then Ole Miss and ECU would be the 5-6 for him.
Yeah, that's what I have too. But for 5 or for 6 and 7.
I don't mind if we place Notre Dame at 7. Or
I think it's
yeah.
warranted. It's one of those things that historically we've Notre Dame's always dropped a little bit, and that's why they haven't made one yet, pretty much. Um, because they tend to play weaker schedule. I think that they deserve to be in. I don't think they would drop
This
to
year
8,
they definitely had a better.
but I think them dropping 2 spots because you had ECU win, and then you also had Ole Miss lose and have
They were at
Georgia
2.
jump them
So
because of the auto bid. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, and
they were at
yeah,
2 before, so
yeah,
them.
when we look at it more, like you said, with Ole Miss and Notre Dame both having 2 losses, one of Ole Miss's losses is to now a top 4, or either the 2 seed or the 3 seed in the playoffs, whereas Notre Dame's both of their losses are again 2, 7, and 5 teams. So
Right. And
they're
even though they have that um win over Georgia, you can't punish Ole Miss too much for losing that game
mhm.
when they have like the 20-point win over Arkansas and Texas A&M and all that stuff.
Fair.
Okay, so what
So
I
that
have penciled
reopens
in,
everything.
so what I have penciled in here is you have Clemson. If we stay with the current format of ECU at 5, Ole Miss at 6, and Notre Dame at 7. That would make Georgia 2, and then make Buffalo 3, Nebraska 4, ECU 5, 6 Ole Miss, and 7 Notre Dame, 8 Baylor. And that would push Georgia and Notre Dame into the Sugar Bowl, and then the Cotton Bowl would be that Ole Miss Buffalo matchup.
Yeah, I like how that's forming up. Like I said earlier, I'm fine with either Georgia or Buffalo at 2 or 3. I mean, if that's just the way it works with how we're seeding Ole Miss and
And just to make sure there's no other.
yeah.
I haven't played Nebraska. Buffalo has not played Ole Miss. Georgia has not played Notre. Oh wait, shoot. Georgia and Notre Dame have already played, haven't they? Yeah, we can't make that
Yeah.
matchup. So if you can't do, well, okay. Are we forced here to make a duplicate matchup? Unless we throw somebody at 5 instead of and put ECU back further.
So I have ECU at 6 on my rankings. Obviously, mine has Notre Dame at 5, so that would be pushed back a little bit. But I could be convinced if we did Clemson 1, Buffalo 2, Georgia 3, Nebraska 4, Ole Miss 5, so it'd be Ole Miss versus Nebraska, ECU at 6, so it'd be ECU Georgia, Notre Dame at 7, so it'd be Buffalo Ole Miss in that scenario, and then Baylor at 8, so it'd be Clemson Baylor would be the that would be, and there would be, if I see that correctly, there'd be no rematches in the first round. It would still keep us with that Buffalo Georgia at 2, ECU having that one of the top 2 spots there for seeding, and would drop Notre Dame back down to that 7 spot because we feel that ECU and Ole Miss are both stronger than Notre Dame. So the only big change would be having ECU facing Georgia rather than having a rematch of Notre Dame and Georgia.
Let's see, so this is gonna be sugar, cotton. Yeah, I mean, unless we're moving more, that's kind of how it has to go. So, all right, so another 2 seed's gonna lose to a 7. You got Buffalo, except Notre Dame technically isn't a Power 5 team, so you got Georgia here at 3. Okay, then we'd have Ole Miss at 5.
Buffalo Notre Dame game would probably be more competitive than Buffalo versus Ole Miss.
ECU at Georgia, so you have the 2 highest overall teams in the game going at it. Then you got 7 would be Notre Dame. And then you'd 8 Baylor. And then on the outside at 9 we'd have Ohio State, who would go to the Outback Bowl. Okay, so I'm gonna go through the matchups in the bracket. Top left bracket the top left would be Clemson and Baylor in the Peach Bowl. The top right bracket would be Buffalo against Notre Dame in the Sugar. Then the bottom right side of the bracket would be Georgia against ECU. So the winner of Georgia ECU would face the winner of Buffalo and Notre Dame in the semifinals in the Rose Bowl. And then in the bottom left of the bracket, it would be Nebraska Ole Miss in the Fiesta Bowl. The winner would face winner of Clemson Buffalo in the Orange Bowl. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. The only way
Okay.
things could really, the only way we could really change anything would be if we really wanted to put Baylor higher, but I don't think that.
I could see Baylor jumping to 7, but it wouldn't really make sense.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
that would be the highest that they could go, and even then, I agree. I think that would be a
Yeah, I don't think the argument is strong enough to put Baylor or for Georgia at 2 to make it necessary to put Notre Dame 8. Yeah. So
Yeah.
no, I think this is fine. I think the playoff, it's a good playoff. A lot of storylines rematch Natty. You got Notre Dame in their first one. Nebraska, Ole Miss will be a great game, and there's SFA players in every single game, so makes sense. Looks good. All right, so now we got to see the rest of the top 25. Um, thing to note is you got um the next highest two ranked CPU teams are going to face each other. Then the next two highest ranked user teams are going to face each other. This is a lot easier though because we only had 10 teams play. So if we need to look at something, we can. Um, but we have Ohio State here. So they're at 9. And then next teams up based on our rankings were from last week were Arkansas, Arizona State, Boston College, Minnesota. Does anybody have a change in those rankings?
I have them all the same.
Yeah, those sound good to me.
Okay, so Arkansas. So that means Arizona State would go to the Citrus Bowl. I think that was pretty much expected from everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Then you got BC at 12. Then you got Minnesota at 13. Now, this is where it gets interesting because you had Arkansas State lose. You had Oregon lose. That was 14 and 15. The teams that are not in the top 25 that we have to rank is going to be obviously the Utah, Iowa two teams.
Do you want to hear my
Um,
wild claim here?
yeah. What do you have at 14?
I have, so I'm gonna give you my next two. I have 14 as Iowa and 15 as Georgia Southern.
So for me, it's a three horse. I don't know if we put them at 14. I'd probably move California up to 14 because I personally think that they're better than any of the next tier we're gonna talk about. The next tier, which would be a three-horse race for who gets to face Arizona State in the Citrus Bowl. Um, I think California would be 14, and then that 15 spot would either be Oklahoma, Georgia Southern, or Iowa. Does that make sense to put California above them? It doesn't really matter in
Yeah,
terms of,
that's
but
Yeah.
yeah.
okay,
I mean that's fair.
California. Um, okay, so let's look at the resumes because this is the most prestigious non or user bowl, and don't want to make the wrong choice here. So let's see. First up, Iowa, 8-5. Terrible loss to start of the year. You can't blame them for the Iowa State loss. They're a top 5 team with Kiko Strong. So he was there for that game. The Miami U loss is terrible, though. And then they rattled off a bunch. Tough loss to Wisconsin on game day. Lost to Michigan. And then lost two tough ones back. Or lost Michigan and Nebraska. But the second half of the Nebraska game was great. And then
The second half of that was great,
obviously
and
they beat Ohio State.
that awesome Minnesota win earlier.
And they have the best win here out of these remaining teams, assuming Oklahoma did knock off one of these top teams, which I don't think they did, but we'll look in a second. But that's Iowa, probably the best win, even though they have the most losses. Then you have um, Oklahoma, who we had ranked at um, 17 last week. So win over Bama, double OT loss to LSU. They did lose to Ole Miss. They beat Kansas, who's number 18 last week. Texas loss was bad. This Auburn loss was very bad. So that
Ugly.
Auburn loss and the Miami Ohio loss are probably about similar. And then they beat Texas A&M, who has some wins over some tough teams. And then obviously the destruction of Arizona on game day. And then finally Georgia Southern. As far as good wins, the Michigan State was a good win, but once again, they completely fell off. And then the Iowa State loss, if you're looking at common opponents, it's a worse loss than the Iowa.
and
And
there.
then the USF loss. So they all have a loss that is just eye-opening, right?
Mhm.
So I kind of think they're all kind of in the same boat with the Auburn, Miami, Ohio, and the
So,
USF.
USF loss, and
but
then the
and we have
Coastal
to,
loss.
but we do have to think with the Michigan State win, that was before any fall off for Michigan State. So they
Right.
weren't as good as Iowa State, but I think that what week 5 Michigan State was. I think
Was
we had them
undefeated.
ranked. Yeah, they were undefeated. I think they were
Top
ranked in the
10.
top five, top five, top 10. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a
So,
big win at that point.
yeah, in terms of um
And to share Pin's opinion, he has Georgia Southern uh, way above Oklahoma, and then Oklahoma just barely above Iowa.
so in terms of wins, the best win, quote unquote, is the Ohio State win. Michigan State, I'd probably put under that. Arkansas State is a good win here as well. Um, does Oklahoma have any star wins, like top tier wins? They have the Kansas win is probably equal to the Arkansas State win at this point. Um, the
The
Texas
ten,
A&M's probably in that same tier because we have them at 20, and then no other crazy good ones. And then let's just get reminded of Iowa here. So, okay, they have the Minnesota win. We didn't even mention that,
yeah,
which is better than I'd say the Minnesota win and the Ohio State wins are actually better than Michigan State. Maybe Michigan State and Minnesota are about equal when you adjust for the injuries.
and the starting red-shirted quarterback.
God,
I'm not gonna let that go. I'm still so mad at it,
yeah, I think it's dumb.
but that's neither here
I
nor
think
there.
so. Okay,
That Miami, Ohio
I think
is
I
real
think
rough.
Oklahoma would be eliminated here. I think to me it's between Iowa and Georgia Southern
I agree.
on who you give it to. I don't think it matters that because we had Georgia Southern ranked at 23, and then last week when we were talking about it, we had Iowa like at 26, 27. So it's not to me a crazy jump for Iowa to do this large of a jump. Um, and if you just look at last week, I mean the like first win in what is it like 10 seasons essentially switched to traditional conferences.
Hmm.
The first time the Big Ten West takes down mighty Ohio State or Michigan State or any of those teams, kind of nutty.
Yeah, it, it's tough because, like I said, I originally I have Iowa above Georgia Southern, but it, it's basically Georgia Southern has had a good season the whole season through. I don't think they've ever dropped out of rankings at all, whereas Iowa has not, dropped out of rankings a long time ago and have been kind of trying to build themselves back up, and is a beating the number 3 team is huge, but Georgia Southern beat Michigan State when they were also a top 5, top 10 team. Um, so though, oh man, it's real
See the
difficult.
Yeah, because also if you think about it, right? Like sure Iowa two of their losses were in the first 2 weeks of the season. So and then they're probably playing the best last two games out of anyone in the country, whereas you have Georgia Southern, who, like Ohio State, stumbled down the stretch. Now the UCF they did not have their starting quarterback, but they had just walloped FAU without the starter. So I don't know if that's too much. But then they're fully healthy here for Coastal, minus a running back, and they still lost. And Coastal didn't even have their star quarterback, so it's like
They lost to
I don't know
Coastal's
what to
backup.
do.
Oh man.
Yeah, the Coastal backup
I think
when they had Josh Johnson 8-5 versus 10-3 when it's P5 versus G5. I don't know if it really matters. Where okay, if you had to choose one, and gun to your head right now, who do you say?
I say Georgia Southern.
I have Iowa. Beasley.
I also have Iowa, and Penn has Georgia Southern.
I can't, man. Oh, who goes to the citrus? Um,
Can I
all
see
right, well,
Iowa one more time?
somebody has to flip. I mean, two losses at the beginning, 4 points,
When
and
can
then
you
a
take a look at
touchdown
that?
to Kiko.
Can you look at that Wisconsin? When did Wisconsin have Stingley at that point?
No, this was a game day. So, this is a game day game. Nebraska was a game day game. Michigan was simmed, and Iowa State was BearCave, and this was simmed, if it matters. And then when you look at Georgia Southern, their win to Michigan State was on game day. Loss was on BearCave. They got absolutely smoked. USF was simmed, and Coastal, I believe, was on BearCave. Might have been simmed. I don't remember.
Can we
Uh,
see? This is gonna sound like a weird question. Can we see Wisconsin's schedule?
yeah. You just want to see an ECU loss, huh?
No, 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 I'm good on that end. I just want to see
So
where they really
Stingley
fell off.
Stingley got injured in this Penn State game. That's why they lost.
Okay.
And then they got up by their bootstraps and got a win on game day. And then they lost 3 of their last 4.
Yeah, and that was my thought is that they were a incredibly notably worse team once they lost him.
Yeah,
And
they went 2-4 to end the year. So
yeah,
yeah.
and okay, and here to make sure again, to make sure Pin's heard, Pin asks his big question: do we view wins as they were at the time, MSU being top 5, or as they are now of MSU unranked? I would
I
argue.
think you
Go ahead.
or go ahead. Well, I guess my opinion is like it sort of matters, but then at the grand scheme of things is like Michigan State's because Michigan State is kind of the weird team here. Michigan
Yeah.
State and
Can we see their
Wisconsin
their schedule as well?
both, yeah, both were really good at the beginning of the year, and then Michigan State fell off a cliff largely because their own coach. These two losses were bad losses or tough losses. The Penn State loss was completely on McNasty, and then it was like an epic comeback last second to beat Maryland. You have to look at this team, no matter what, was a 3-loss team at full quote unquote full strength. I
Hmm.
mean,
But
you have to consider them that like
and
you
I would
can
say
at most write off Penn State
if they beat Penn State there, uh, if they beat Penn State there, I think they're a ranked team to end the season.
probably.
Still, um,
Yeah,
I think that with looking at that Wisconsin schedule or looking at Wisconsin's situation of losing Stingley, who was basically their offense, he's the reason that they were successful. Seeing them just drop off that cliff, showing what kind of team they were the whole time, or showing that that was their team was Stingley, and they still found a way to lose to him. It. I see that the similar way that we were saying that Coastal beat Georgia Southern with a back quarterback. Wisconsin beat Iowa without their offensive star on game day. I would
yeah.
lean. I think I would lean towards Georgia Southern taking the nod over Iowa after looking at it a little deeper.
So Wisconsin to me and Michigan State, if you remove injuries, are both 3-loss teams. I would think Ohio State, you still lose. They'd probably switch this. Win this game. They'd win this game probably. They'd probably still lose one of these three.
Hmm.
I would say probably Illinois, and they'd probably still lose to Minnesota. And same deal with uh, Michigan State. So it's kind of just like of choice. If you guys want to go Georgia Southern, I'm not too mad at it, even
And
though
I
I
think
think
they're at the end,
and
like you're saying, Wisconsin, Michigan State. In reality, they're both three-loss teams, but then in the end, Iowa lost to that alleged three-loss team. Georgia Southern beat the three-loss team.
yeah. And the only other thing I would say is the Citrus Bowl is a game day style game,
Mm-hmm.
which Iowa has really only shown up for um one half out of two games. So yeah. So let's just go Georgia Southern 15, JSOW 15, and
Oh
then
yeah,
we'll go Iowa
and
16.
I missed Pin had commented. Georgia Southern did beat Binks and the boys on game day. Iowa has 2 losses of their 5 on game day. So he had that same thought there.
Yeah. So after 16, which is Iowa, then I would say we just stick with Oklahoma, Kansas, and then we start adjusting for the rest of these conference championship wins.
Would you? Okay, so where did we have SMU last week? 22,
Yeah, so we had them at 22.
and they ended up.
Um,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, they ended up winning in overtime. We had Louisiana at 19, so that's why I said this is probably the spot to put SMU.
I and my question was going to be, do we have SMU jump Kansas and Oklahoma because they were able to beat, the number 19 team. So they beat a top 20 ranked team to win their conference championship.
I think that that's enough to jump. Like they have to. I think it's enough to jump Houston, even though they don't have the head-to-head.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably enough to jump Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe enough to jump Kansas and Oklahoma. Uh,
Yeah, I would personally have them at at that next spot, at that 17
at the
spot.
17.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I
Yeah,
would go them, and
I
then
think that's fair.
Kansas, Oklahoma would be the next two, in whichever order.
So Oklahoma has head-to-head, so we gotta
Okay,
go
so yeah,
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma, then Kansas.
Okay, so now
UE
this
does
is
that.
kind of tough because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spots left, but competing for this spot is we have Arkansas State, who was at 14. You have Oregon. We have to rank Utah. Um, I just want to make sure I don't forget a champ. Um, Miami probably falls out with the loss.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
We have to rank Houston in here.
I think Louisiana falls out with the loss.
Yeah, Louisiana probably falls out. Nobody else is on the verge. We've eliminated West Virginia a long time ago.
San Diego
Um,
State has to be ranked.
yeah, San Diego State. Obviously, we have SMU, and this is where definitely favor the conference champions. So, Ball State, not a chance in the world. UNLV, we did have ranked at 25. They might be on the outside looking in, depending on what happens. But I'd probably still rank Oregon because it was triple overtime and Utah. Um, SEC, we have these teams already ranked. And then Sun Belt, I think you do still rank Arkansas State. There they have some of the best players in the country. So, ah,
I'm trying to think. And with San Diego State last week, we had them just on the outside looking in, and now they've beat the number 25 in UNLV. So would we go
and we
Utah
have to A&M.
Utah next with
So I probably would keep. I would probably keep A&M in Houston,
okay.
and then I'd probably then go Utah, and then Oregon immediately, and then Arkansas State and UNLV. Because we could still rank UNLV here. We're
Wait,
kind of
did did UNLV win the conference championship or did San
no.
Diego State?
Oh, sorry, San Diego State, not UNLV. UNLV's out.
Yeah.
Okay, So,
Suddenly I was like, wait a minute, did I get this
yeah,
all
sorry, sorry,
wrong?
sorry.
No,
No, no,
you're
you're
good.
good, you're good. Okay. I yeah, I'd probably still have A&M, toughest schedule in the country by far. Then Houston, and then I'd probably go Utah, Oregon, San Diego State, and then ranked 25 Arkansas State.
I would probably put San Diego State over Oregon, but beyond that, I would.
Really?
Mm, I mean, let's obviously we can look at their and Yui if you have something different.
Penn
Sorry, I don't mean to
State,
speak over you.
Ohio State.
All of the at least
Cal. Is the ASU win just too much over? Like they have the ASU win. San Diego State has their best win is UNLV.
Their best win is UNLV, but their other three losses are to Michigan State, who again, we know we're playing the same game of the team they were versus the team they are now. But they're week two Michigan State when they were strong. Ohio State and Buffalo were their three other losses. So all be like that's the thing is that they don't have a lot of amazing huge wins, but they were never expected to win any of those first three games that they lost.
Yeah. So does the um so really what you're saying is that the Georgia Tech loss, the Boise State loss,
Yeah.
like cancel out the ASU win because they both lost at Ohio State. They both lost to they lost to an Iowa, they lost to a Penn State, and then the triple overtime loss, and then they actually got it done. Yeah, I'm fine with that. All right.
Yeah.
So just penciling it in here, A&M, Houston. Did Penn say something? That was Utah. Then we have SDSU, Oregon, Arkansas State. So, D-Sleep,
Pins.
I am gonna need your recording too, because mine stopped right at the end here. So
Okay. Perfect. Yeah.
hopefully
I
you
can.
have yours. Yeah,
Yep. Mine's
perfect.
still running, so you can stitch.
Okay.
I'll send it over and you can stitch them together. Pin said he's good with all of that as well.
Okay, so let's just go back through. Um, we have Clemson in the Peach against Baylor. You have Buffalo in the Sugar against Notre Dame. You have Georgia in the Cotton against ECU, and Nebraska against Ole Miss in the Fiesta. And then outside, 9 is Ohio State, 10 is Arkansas, 11 is Arizona State, 12 is Boston College, 13 is Minnesota, 14 California, 15 Georgia Southern, and they would face Arizona State in the Citrus. And then 16 is Iowa, 17 is SMU, 18 is Oklahoma, 19 Kansas, 20 Texas A&M, 21 Houston, 22 Utah, 23 San Diego State, 24 Oregon, and 25 Arkansas State.
Yep. That sounds good to me. And Yui in chat also says same here for good with those.
Okay, cool, cool. All right. Well, thank you guys for staying up in your East Coastness or Centralness or whatever, Minnesota, Michigan, wherever you are, Wisconsin, somewhere up there.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So, um, yeah, um, I'm gonna post this top 25 just in the committee discussion, and then we'll release it tomorrow. Once the others have a chance to look at it.
Okay.
But yeah, I think this is a good. I think this is good.
Am I
So
good to
we'll
stop recording?
yeah, stop recording.